Sabah al-Khair, good morning, dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Robert Martin, Nasser Mashni and Yusuf Ahmed al-Rimawi.
Palestine Remembered is Australia's only English-language radio program that is totally dedicated to Palestine. We'd like to welcome those listening on 855 and those that will join us on podcast at 3cr.org.au.
Thanks for joining us. Stay with us and enjoy the episode.
Good morning, listeners. I'm very excited today. I'm with my first opportunity of panelling by myself, going live. I'm going to be joined by one of my favourite Australian Palestinians and a real inspiration to Palestinians in Australia for her wonderful advocacy and efforts and what she's done since she's been in Australia. I'm very, very excited to introduce Asil to our audiences. Good morning, Asil.
Good morning. Good
How
morning,
are you?
Master. I'm so good. I'm so happy to hear Palestine in Australia over and over again.
Thank you so much, Asil. Now, Asil, for those that don't know, she's a performer, she's an artist, she's increasingly becoming an academic, and she's a mother and wife, and just the most fantastic Palestinian woman. Now, Asil, you've been advocating and championing a cause very, very close to you. Can you tell us about your library project?
Yeah, well, yesterday we launched our 6 toy libraries in Gaza. 6 different spaces and venues within organizations that we are partnering with that deal with women and children safety and mental health. And those toy libraries have been, the whole initiative started 6 months ago, or like 7 months, last June. Just when I thought that if I am safe in Australia and I still have hardship raising my child in a safe and very secured place, what does women in Gaza specifically feel and how they can actually survive the daily life when they are bombed every single day and when they're really not feeling safe themselves? So how can they make this environment safe for their children? So that's how the whole toy library started.
And so the fundraising, Asil, the reality is you can't do this sort of activity without money. It's complicated because you're so far away. You understand the occupation, how cruel it is and how hard it is to get things done. How did you raise the money to do this?
Well, it was really like magic. I just said, okay, I looked at different websites and said I would just post a post on Facebook and I have a fundraising link to it. We can fundraise on Facebook, so I just post that and I went to sleep and I woke up with a $2,000 donations on their first day. And that made me feel like, okay, there's lots of hope. People in Australia know that life in Palestine is very hard and they would love to support. And within maybe 10 days after that, we had a 15,000. I said, okay, let's raise it to 20. And then we got up to 18,000 in the end on that fundraising. But another donations from friends and family and people that in different organizations have supported in different ways. Through my website as well, people could donate. And the Malta Theatre supported my flights, which was amazing. So that's kind of different. That just gives me hope in the Australian friends of mine and people that's around us that they care. They just wait for the opportunity to really support and give their love and heart to the cause.
That's fantastic, Asil. And how have the libraries been received?
Well, we are just starting. The other thing I have to mention is with the money that we fundraised here, we built the libraries. We organized the whole things that we needed for the libraries. But all the toys that we gathered, which is the whole trailer of 12 pallets, 280 boxes of toys were collected within Palestine, within different Palestinian cities under the Israeli occupation that have said, we want to help, that's our people. And they gathered all the toys because that cost lots of money that we couldn't raise within that short time. So the toy libraries are just starting. People are the artists and social workers take some toys from the libraries and go to the schools. Moms come to the libraries and enjoy the children. But it's just the very first week. So we are kind of putting our head together and planning it for 6 months to see, because at the moment we cannot really give. It's supposed to be a borrowing system. but because we also still need money for computers and all of the kind of things that we need for the next phase, we're just kind of doing a trailer of how to actually introduce the borrowing culture into the space and the toy library culture into the space slowly until we kind of feel more confident to release it fully in there.
That's fantastic. Now, Asil, I'm on your Facebook page, but we should get our listeners to go and look at your Facebook page and become your friend so they can see just the wondrous video. So your Facebook page is Asil Tayah, so ASEELTAYAH. And what about your website?
It's also the same. It's the same if that people write my website, they can see like my name. They can also find me in Google, and they just go. I don't know if any other Asil Tayah that does art and things in Australia.
There's only one Asil.
No, there's plenty of amazing Asils. It's just like I don't know if there's a website. I haven't found any other website. So
well,
that's kind of easy.
You're our amazing Asils. Thank you so very much. And what about what can our listeners do to help you? I mean, obviously this is only the first step. What's the next step?
Well, the first step is yes to kind of think. I would love, of course, to invite them. I'm going to speak about this initiative in different places, and I'm going to list them later today as well on my website, so people can go and watch and listen and even support. The first one is at Lalor Library as part of the International Women's Day, and then at WOW Festival in Brisbane in early April, and in different places and conferences for Toy Library Australia and Playgroup Australia that also has been amazingly supportive of the initiative and just believe that we can do it together. They can also go to my website and look for the donations or even contact me within my website and I can let them know what they can do. But best is just to advocate and tell people what is life in Palestine and how we can make it better and stop all these seeds and make it easier for our children and mothers to continue their life.
Fantastic, Asil. Thank you so very much. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, Asil Tayah, ASEELTAYAH. And Asil has left her classroom to be with us today. So thank you very much, Asil, for joining us. And look forward to much more success from you.
Thank you, Nathan. All the best.
Thank you. And we'll be back after this ad. Okay, thank you. That was amazing, Asil. So please, listeners, if you get a chance, get onto our website, check out our Facebook page, and you can see the beautiful pictures of the library the libraries that have opened in Gaza. It really is amazing, and the challenges she had to go through to get the toys there. And look, it's a wonderful story, and we only had a limited time with Asil, but thank you very much, Asil. Excuse me. On Monday afternoon, there is a public gathering, and for Brother Peter Bray, who's the Vice Chancellor of the Bethlehem University in Palestine. He's presented by the Uniting Church and the Congregation of Mark the Evangelist in North Melbourne and Wesley Church. It's in collaboration with the Palestine-Israel Ecumenical Network. 6:30 Monday night. If you get a chance, if you're about, go and see Brother Peter Bray at the Wesley Church in Melbourne, 148 Lonsdale Street. Wesley Church, Melbourne, 148 Lonsdale Street between Russell and Exhibition Streets. You can find more details at apan.org.au, but it'd be great if you went along. I know he was on Jan Bartlett's show earlier in the week. He's a wonderful man and a real humanitarian, so big thanks to the Uniting Church and the Palestine-Israel Ecumenical Network for bringing out Brother Peter Bray. Again, 6:30 Monday night at the Wesley Church in Melbourne, 148 Lonsdale Street. So get along. I'll be there. It'd be great to see our listeners. Now, Australia has wonderfully really put their hand up yet again, because that's what we do when our like-minded nation, Israel, calls out for help, as it did recently. Countries that are founded on colonialism. It's too early in the morning for me to get the C word out. They call upon each other and say, look, in times of crisis, we really must stick together. And the crisis today, well, for Israel, is the fact that Palestine, who asked the International Criminal Court to have a look or to open up investigations as to whether or not there had been war crimes committed in Palestine. And Palestine asked for this to happen in somewhere 2015. And since that time, well, the best part of 5 years, the International Criminal Court prosecutor Fatou Bensouda has been investigating as to whether or not there was sufficient evidence that war crimes were committed in Israel. And interestingly, the Palestinians asked for a thorough investigation to investigate Israel, but also to investigate the Palestinian forces. Now, Palestine joined what became asked to join the ICC in 2009, but the investigation was rejected because Palestine was not a state. In 2012, Palestine joined as a non-member state via the UN, and in 2015 accepted the jurisdiction of the Rome Statute and thus became a state party to the ICC. That's when the investigations came up, and they were focused on settlements, crimes by the IDF, and also by Palestinian armed forces. And these investigations were ongoing. 2018, Palestine again referred the prosecutor to the situation and asked for investigation. And late last year, the prosecutor announced that the statutory criteria had been met under the Rome Statute for opening an investigation, indicating that evidence of war crimes had been committed by both sides. The prosecutor requested a ruling from a pre-trial chamber to confirm territorial jurisdiction. Now, this is that territory a state? Am I allowed to go and investigate further? Well, immediately, of course, Netanyahu accused the ICC of being an anti-Semite, because, immediately that's got to happen. Australia, very soon after, responded with a decision stating that they didn't accept that Palestine was a state, and thus there was nothing for them to investigate. Australia then writes to Netanyahu and says, we support you, that we don't think an investigation should proceed. The ICC created a pre-trial in January, and then invited members and others to submit their thoughts on the situation. And the word is an amicus, is what's actually a legal brief that's being filed. Now, interestingly, Israel is not a signatory, not a party to the ICC. Australia is. Australia, Austria, Germany, Brazil, and the Czech Republic have all filed, along with Australia, Israel and the United States, amicuses saying that they don't accept that Palestine's a state, and therefore the ICC doesn't have jurisdiction to investigate whether war crimes have been committed. Now, I keep saying this about jurisdiction, and it's important that from a legal point of view, obviously they want to have jurisdiction, the right to investigate. Australia, in its amicus, Israel, Austria, Germany, Brazil, Czech Republic, etc., none of them mention at all the settlements. None of them mention the ongoing open-air prison that is Gaza, the war crimes, the 3 massacres committed by the Israeli army with, funky names like Summer Rain and Hot August Nights and, other Neil Diamond type songs. No mention of the brutality and the murder and the inhumanity of the situation for Palestinians living under the apartheid Israeli regime. The only question is whether or not the ICC has jurisdiction. Sadly, Australia's gone all in with Israel and these other countries. Interestingly, recently I heard overnight that Uganda has decided to join that group and declare that the ICC doesn't have a mandate because Palestine's not a state. What really, I never thought we would actually get much worse than what we had under Tony Abbott and John Howard. But, whenever you talk about Palestine, you only have opportunities to get more disappointed. And whilst there's always been bipartisan support for Israel under the evangelical Scotty from advertising has gone the next step. And, as we know, one of the earliest acts of our Prime Minister was to follow Donald Trump and recognise West Jerusalem, even though he was warned that would inflame tensions with so many of Australia's biggest trading partners, aside from being just illegal. On the 70th anniversary of Australia-Israel diplomatic relations in Parliament House, Morrison said that, he had already opposed 6 resolutions that attacked Israel in the UN General Assembly. In the past, we'd abstained on these resolutions. Not anymore, and not on my watch. Look, the reality is, sadly for Palestinians in Australia and for lovers of human rights and justice, we've never had a more pro-Israeli, less Palestinian sympathetic government in Australia. So, look, it really, really is a sad indictment on where we are today. Just hold on and join me after this break. We'll speak to you a little bit more. The beacon, the shining example that is the democracy that is Israel, the democracy that is a light unto nations. There was a recent video, some stormtrooper Israeli army stormed a rooftop of a Palestinian house in East Jerusalem, and the kids were having a birthday party, and there was some balloons up there, and they separated the kids from the balloons. I'm talking a reasonable amount of balloons, something like 20 balloons with helium, so they were floating. And they separated the kids from the balloons, and then, this guy, and, full battle fatigues, the whole kit and caboodle, with what must have been a pin or, some sharp object, just systematically popped every single balloon. And this is the level at which the occupation, just sits over every bit of Palestinian life. A child's birthday party. Just this week we had a Palestinian kid, a 9-year-old, walking home from school. He was shot with a rubber bullet. And, for our listeners, no, of course, rubber bullets are not, a soft eraser, if you will, that, bounces off your skin, but they're in fact metal-coated rubber bullets. Now, if they hit a firm part of an adult body, they leave a very large welt. There is, if you're wearing thin clothing or if it hits bare skin, incidences where they will pierce the skin, but they won't actually generally penetrate too deeply on an adult. On a child, though, on soft tissue, the damage is horrific. And this young boy, 9 years old, walking home, shot in an eye, coming home from school, and now has lost his sight in one of his eyes. So, it's this is in the Hebron region, real sad situation, an ongoing situation. I want to talk about democracy in Israel, and I want to talk about democracy because it's something that's extolled as one of the virtues of Israel, and it's a beacon, the only democracy in the region, a reason why Australia should be supporting it. Israel, like us, is has a rules-based order, separation of church and state. And certainly it does have all of those things if you're an A-class citizen in Israel, and we've talked about A-class citizens, the Ashkenazi Jews. But democracy isn't a real thing if you're a Palestinian. And if you go back to the tenets, the founding of the State of Israel, it was predicated on the expulsion and destruction of an indigenous population that was living there. So immediately we had to get rid of 90% of the population, and that was the Nakba. And then the Jews opted for a liberal democratic governance for that Jewish majority, but then immediately instituted apartheid systems for the Palestinians that they couldn't expel. Some Palestinians didn't leave. And for those, they created dozens of racist laws, corralled them into areas, curfews that extended for a decade, and the lack of opportunity or representation within the state apparatus. Even Theodore Herzl, way back when, he actually cautioned against democratic commitments, and he was always worried about the problem because he knew that Palestine was inhabited, and if you're going to extol democracy and there are people there, well then it can't be democratic, and certainly it's not going to be democratic with a Jewish majority when in its infancy, without some sort of a couple of events. Number one, the cleansing of those indigenous people, but then also a huge movement or influx of Jews to create that migration. So the basis of a Jewish and democratic state has to be, just based on the math, needs a Jewish supremacy, and it mandates ethnic cleansing. So even at its earliest genesis, back in the late 1890s through to the early 1900s, there had to be a cleansing of the Palestinians. And Herzl wrote in his diary, we had to try to spirit the penniless population across the border by procuring employment for it in transit countries whilst denying it any employment in our country. The removal of the poor must be carried out discreetly and circumspectly. Let the owners of the immovable property believe that they are cheating us, selling us things for more than they are worth, but we are not going to sell them back anything. And this was the modus operandi on which Zionism in its early stages worked in Palestine. But as the colonies multiplied, so did the expulsion of Palestinians. A Polish agronomist, Chaim Kalwersky, and this guy was a manager of Jewish Colonization Association, reported in 1920, and he's someone who's been dispossessing Palestine since the 1890s. The question of the Arabs first appeared to me in all its seriousness immediately after the first purchase of land I made here. I had to dispossess the Arab residents of their land for the purpose of settling our brothers. And he complained about, that the crying of because many of these Palestinians were workers on land owned by other Palestinians, many of whom weren't actually in Palestine. Many of whom took the opportunity of getting paid 2 and 3 and 5 and 10 times more than the land was worth to buy other property and investments that they subsequently lost in 1948. They weren't in the 20s and the teens aware of what was the impending doom that was about to befall Palestine. And Kalwersky, he complained about the doleful dirge of those he was forcing out. And he said, it did not stop ringing in my ears for a long time thereafter. I'm sure it didn't stop him from sleeping. The Zionist fear of universal democracy and their commitment to ethnic cleansing was so strong after the First World War, when the British, concerned with the overextending themselves, wanted the US to assume part of the responsibility for Palestine. And the World Zionist Organization vehemently objected to the US being involved. And the reason they didn't want the United States involved was there was already movements within the United States for increasing civil liberties of the African Americans there. It was still, in the South, a terrible place to be an African American. But the World Zionist Organization wasn't keen on the United States being involved. Because in democracy in America, it means the majority rule. And at that time in the 1920s, the Zionists were still a significant minority in Palestine. And we didn't want the Americans to be involved. What they really wanted was the benevolence of a colonialist mentality of the colonialist mentality of the British. Moving forward, you get to the 20s and 30s, and the Zionists, keep pushing out the Palestinians. Through to David Ben-Gurion, later the first Prime Minister of Israel, he declares in 1938, I support compulsory transfer. I do not see anything immoral in it. I do not see anything immoral in it. Unbelievable. This is a statement followed and adopted by the Jewish Agency, which created a population transfer committee. And its job from the late 30s was to strategize the forceful expulsion of the Palestinians. 2 additional committees were established in 1941 and 1948. Now, in 1941, and November 1937, when this population transfer committee was established, that was a full year before Kristallnacht, in November of 1938 in Nazi Germany. So a full year before the unleashing of the evilness that ended up being the Nazi regime, and the evilness that was the concentration camps, and the evilness that was the Shoah, the Holocaust. A full year before that, the Zionists of Palestine had set up population transfer committees. David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first Prime Minister, said, I support compulsory transfer. I do not see anything immoral in it. I mean, it's, head-hurting and mind-hurting where that is. And it gets us to that concept of where we are today, where we have now in all of historic Palestine an indigenous Palestinian majority now. Gaza, West Bank, East Jerusalem, 1948, we have a Palestinian majority. And we're living, what we've got there is the most brutal settler colonialist apartheid state which has taken its teachings and learnings from the American model of the genocide of the Indigenous Americans, the British India model of massive violence and stealing resources, through to the South African version, ultimately completed with Trump's most recent plan of creating Bantustans and reservations and herding the natives into those little places where they have no control over their resources, daily movement, etc. This is barbarity at its maximum, and a real sad situation that countries like Australia, who model themselves as, they're neoliberal colonial societies, but they, talk about how wonderful they are, that we've got a situation now where we are supporting a rogue apartheid state in its continued dispossession of Palestinians. I'm sad that we ended on such a somber note. I'm very heartened by the work and efforts of Aseel earlier on today. Please make sure you check out her website, aseeltaya.com, or Aseel Taya on Facebook. And be sure to see Brother Peter Bray Monday at 6:30 p.m. at the Wesley Church in Melbourne. Thanks so very much for listening, and please join me next week. I've got a special guest coming from Palestine. Take care and have a great week.
I've been moved by the wind upon the waters.